Welcome to the Smiling at the Future podcast. My name is Christy Rose, and this is my pursuit to glean practical wisdom on femininity, homemaking, finances, relationships, and singleness from the God-fearing men and women in my life. Hope you enjoy this journey with me as we learn to smile at the future. Happy 2026, dear friends, because our God is so loving and wise and powerful, we can smile at this coming year, come what may. I'm so glad that you have tuned in for another season, and I hope we can all strive to grow into more Christ-likeness. On today's episode, I have Reagan Rose joining me again to talk about taming your smartphone so that we can be less distracted Christians. And that is our desire as single women, that we can have undistracted devotion to Christ. And much of that in today's world comes down to taming our phones. I came away from this conversation ready to put Reagan's ideas into practice, and I hope it inspires you to do so as well. So here is my conversation with Reagan Rose. Reagan, I'm thankful to have you on the podcast again, but before we dive in, can you share about yourself and the ministry that you run?
Yeah, sure. I'm Reagan Rose. I am the creator of Redeeming Productivity, which is a ministry that helps Christians get things done, but do it to the glory of God. So we approach the topic of personal productivity, habits, goals, that kind of stuff from a deeply theological, biblically rooted foundation, and then pair that with like practical strategies of how you actually manage your time and day and all of those with an eye towards living a life that pleases God. I live here in Southeast Michigan, where it's very cold right now, and I have a wife and three little ones that you might hear running around.
Well, you're no stranger, Reagan, and we're not related. I feel like I have to say that every time I have you on because we do have same last name. But I met you when you were at Grace Community Church and worked together at Grace to You. And I've been so encouraged by just the ministry that you have and the books you've written. I've probably one of my top 10 books is your book, Redeeming Productivity. So that is a great one to start out the year with. I would recommend the listeners to listen to that. I did an episode with you on that as well. You are an expert in your field of Christian productivity. So unique angle. I think you spoke to the motives are what matter here, why we do what we do. And so the topic today on our smartphone usage fits well under that umbrella of being productive. But it doesn't take an expert to know that smartphones are incredibly distracting for us, and they are tools. But more often than not, they become hindrances in our lives. And so I thought this would be a great topic to kick off the new year with so that we can gain control over this part of our lives so that we can be more faithful stewards with what God has given us. So I would love for you to just share what your smartphone usage looks like today and what other practices you have set in place to not let technology master your life.
It's kind of funny because if you look back, I've been writing on personal productivity for, I think, almost 10 years online. And if you look back to some of the early articles, like I was very gung-ho about phones in like the 2010s, and about the promise. I think it's Steve Jobs who described computers, he described as a bicycle for the mind. This idea of like, they're going to be these productivity devices that sort of extend us and make us better and able to accomplish so many more things. And when we got those in our pocket, with the smartphone, it just seemed like, well, this is going to help me do more. But like, I think very quickly, my experience, probably most people's experience, is it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, yeah, I can check my email or, have a video call with grandma or all there's great stuff you can do with them. But it's also like this giant distraction machine. And so I feel like for me, the past 10 years has been like this back and forth about how do I use this thing well and avoid the downsides. And so I've tried a lot of different stuff. I've tested all the different dumb phones, the app blockers, deleting apps, putting the phone in grayscale mode and all of that. But currently, for the last year and some change, I have been using just a standalone Apple Watch as my phone. So it's set up as like a children's Apple Watch on my wife's phone plan. So basically, I can do calls and texts and Apple Maps, and I can even check email on there, though I don't if I wanted to. So I've got a lot of the conveniences of like the actual things that we've grown to feel like we need on a phone, but there's just no ability. Like I cannot get on if a social media or browse if I wanted to. I couldn't watch a YouTube video on there, and that for me has been a good balance where I feel like all the stuff that I would waste time on, I just don't have that option.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting. I don't have an Apple Watch, but just all the things you can do, like you said, it has navigation, so you can still know where you're driving and you can listen to podcasts, you have notes, you can check email, but just limits the distracting type of apps on there. But what would be the spiritual benefits that you've noticed as you've taken steps to put boundaries around technology?
Yeah, it's been interesting because it's probably not like the first thing that occurs to us with like we know we're distracted with the smartphones and stuff, but once you take it away, there's sort of like this void. And like I that sounds like dramatic, but it really is. Like I think that's one of the reasons it's like hard to not do it because like, well, what do I do when I'm bored? And I think we're around the same age, Christy, but like I think we had the benefit of growing up in a time where there weren't phones, they weren't ubiquitous. And so I thought back to like, well, what did I used to do? Like when I got rid of my phone, the first time I did like a dumb phone, I was like, what did I used to do when I was bored? And I remember like when I was in college, I had like a little pocket Bible, like a New Testament and the Psalms that was in my back pocket. I would pray when I waited for the bus when I was at school. Like there was a lot of things, very natural, not even like deliberate devotional time in my life, but just the passive time that I had driving where I'd be thinking about things, meditating on something about the Lord, praying, reading scripture, like those things. I realized I had flushed them completely out of my life because, like, when I killed boredom by having this phone, there was always some media, always something to check. I had like put aside this whole the free time that allows me to have that space to think about those things. And I think like the other thing that showed up, which I think is probably a little more obvious and was what I'd hoped for, was more presence with people, especially with my family and stuff, not distracted when I'm with the kids. But I think that's it's been lots and lots of really big upside. Even with I said that, the sort of praying on the go, but even like my devotional time in the morning, there's not this temptation. I'd wake up and I'd feel the temptation like to check my phone or open my Bible. And I know some people read their Bibles on the phone, but like for me, I felt like every morning there was like this crossroads. And it was like, am I going to be disciplined enough? Because I know once I open the phone, I end up going down the rabbit hole and I'm going to waste half an hour or 2 hours, if we're honest, and I'd lose the whole morning. And so removing that option and that temptation made me more consistent in like daily devotion stuff and just being like, well, there's nothing else to do. Why not open up the word and read the next part in my reading plan? I don't think that I'm not trying to suggest that the way I'm doing it is ideal for everyone or that it's the best way objectively somehow. I think that you kind of have to meet your own like where you're at with solutions that best fit you. And like I have, and I know this about myself, I have somewhat of like an addictive personality. Like I grew up as a young man, I was addicted to video games. And so like I know there's something in me I have to watch out for, that like it's hard for me to do certain things in moderation, like even just going on social media and stuff. And so for me, I just figured out over time that kind of the ways of just moderating like weren't working for me because I would end up defaulting back to just like spending too much time on the phone. So, but for a lot of people, they're not wired that same way. And that what they want is just to limit things somewhat. Like they're getting more benefit, like you may be getting more benefit from the phone than, more upside than downside. And so then it's just about being strategic about, okay, how do I limit the stuff that I don't want, that is a distraction? Because I don't think we need to, not yet at least, throw all the phones in the ocean, you know?
One thing that I think would improve spiritually when you're putting boundaries, when you're really being watchful over this area of your life, is you're going to have more room to just meditate on scripture. I think that is probably prayer and meditation, I think, are probably two of the things that have suffered the most with us being constantly distracted. And you read the Puritans and you're just like, wow, these are such deep thinkers. And they had time to think and they, would just mull over verses and pull out so much richness from God's word just by thinking about it and meditating on it. And so I know for myself, that is an area that I see as more of a, obviously I want to pursue that. Anything that'll contribute to being able to meditate and to focus on the word of God and to pray. And then like you talked about, you're able to invest more in other people in those face-to-face interactions. That is something I've even noticed with other friends who've never gone down the social media route. I have some friends that have just never dabbled in that. They are so present and so deep in their friendships. And they're just different. And I want to be like that and invest in those face-to-face real interactions with people and not just scrolling through and learning about people passively online.
Yeah, because it's like the online relationship stuff. It's not that there's no benefit to it, but it's almost like it scratches that God-given itch for like fellowship with people, but like just enough to like keep you coming back. But it doesn't, it's not the real thing. You're not really knowing people and investing in them. And it's like this really sad trade-off. And one of the things I thought about like on reflection with like getting off of that stuff was that it was like really hard to like detach from the online world, even in a little bit, because there's that whole, FOMO, the fear of missing out. But like in hindsight, I'm like, I should have had the fear of missing out on real life because that was what the trade-off I was making. Like, and when you start to cut back on some of that stuff, it's not that you're giving up on the relational like needs where you're saying, oh, well, of all these relationships, and like that's an online part of me. When you cut that out or cut down on it, that drive, that natural God-given drive to be with people, to connect with people, has to seek out its fulfillment where it actually should be, which I think the majority of our relationship should be embodied, like being there with people, like the people God has providentially placed around us in our lives. And it's almost like you have to like, at least for me, you have to like cut out the fake thing to allow those drives to direct you towards like their actual intended ends, which is real life fellowship.
Yeah, that observation is so insightful. And it wasn't until you cut down on the social media type of socialization that you started to crave the real thing. And I really like how you said that. You began being with people that God had providentially placed in your life. But beyond the social effect, what other ways is technology changing people?
Yeah. There's been a lot of like well documented ones just in the past few years. There was a really popular book, I think it was last year, the year before, The Anxious Generation by John Haidt, on like the psychological impacts on young people. That was sort of his focus on that. He's coming from a secular perspective. But it was, I mean, I read that book. It's very alarming about the ways that it was basically rewiring people's brains and like the reward system of our brains and all that. But I think as Christians, we recognize that, the distance between psychology and matters of the soul isn't as big of a gap as maybe the world thinks of it, And so sometimes we sort of separate that out, and you can almost set it aside and be like, oh, well, yeah, there's these psychological issues. But like I think if you reframe it as, no, it is having an effect on your soul. It like that should make us, perk our ears up and sit up straight and be like, wait a second, like, well, how, if this is changing me, if it's rewiring my habits, the things I think about, the way I think about the world, that's not something to just say, oh well, everyone's doing it, because that's sort of the default, like the easy excuse is we look around and say, well, this is just how the world is now. Well, I think, believers in Christ Jesus, that's not how we are to be different from the world. And that might mean changing our habits with technology. And that's one of the ways we might stand out from the world. And I don't think we should be so scared of that. But I think that's a big part of it, is like it is rewiring us in ways beyond just the attention stuff. But the content aspect, I think there's been a lot of focus on that, rightly so. And I'm not even talking about like the worst types of content you consume with social media, but just the banality of it. Like if you're scrolling TikTok or even like Instagram, which I think has higher quality content than TikTok, I think. I'm not on either anymore. But we're giving this attention to these ideas and these worldviews and these outlooks. And I just don't think, how can we possibly hope to discern through all of that? Like if you're drinking from a fire hose and someone takes a little eyedropper and puts a drop of poison in there, are you going to notice? Like how could you possibly, like, I think maybe we lie to ourselves and think, well, I'm a Christian, I have good discernment, I have a biblical worldview. And then you just scroll, 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 and just so much content goes into your brain that you can't possibly be filtering it all out. And I think we have to have some humility about our own ability to filter that stuff and not imbibe false worldviews and say, hey, I'm not that strong. Same way I think we should have some humility about the addiction aspect too, of like, sometimes people say, well, just have self-control. It's like, well, these are billion-dollar companies that are all working to hack your natural psychology so that you spend as much time as possible on it. Like, who's going to win in that fight? And then if I could add another one, I just think we are saddling ourselves with, some people call it cognitive debt, but that's just a fancy way of saying, like, we're not letting our brains rest long enough to process anything. So that's related to the discernment thing. But I think, and we may have talked about this last time I came on, but it's one of the reasons I think people are doing less than ever, but we feel busier than ever. You know what I mean? Like I work in the time management world, and I'll have people like map. They're like, I'm just so busy, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm like, well, we map out their schedule and we look at it. I'm like, there's not that much that you're doing. They're like, well, why do I feel so busy? It's because your brain is on like 11 out of 10 all the time, trying to process all this stuff you're throwing at it. And so you just get so glutted on information. And so you're overwhelmed by it. You feel absolutely busy. And it's just like, how can we possibly hope to, like you mentioned, like meditate on the more important things, like the God honoring things, like think about his attributes, or meditate on scripture and have insight, or even have a moment to pause and reflect on ourselves such that we might feel convicted about a sin in our lives or something that needs to change. Like there's no time. And I really think it's a device of Satan. I don't know who said it. I know it's attributed to Corey Ten Boom, but she says something like, if the devil can't make us bad, he'll make us busy. And I think that we are all way more mentally busy than any creature could ever possibly be expected to handle on a day to day. And it's self-imposed.
That's so good. And you talked about how it feels so normal because everyone is living this way. And so we're not fully aware of the dangers here. I remember reading in one of your article, you compared it to what cigarettes were like back in the day. Everyone was smoking. It was so normal. It was so socially acceptable until the laws and the studies came out about how terrible it was for your health. And then all of a sudden there was this shift of people, moving away from that. It took time to make that shift. But we have God's word to provide clarity, even if our culture, I mean, we have all the studies and everything that point to how bad it is for us. Smartphone use and technology is on our brains. And like you said, even our souls. But we have God's word to provide clarity and to help us to think about this. So I know some of us are just kind of so numb to what it's doing to us, kind of maybe apathetic because it's just so normal, like everyone's doing it. We've been doing it for so many years now. But yeah, how is it hindering our walk? And, God wired us to change into what we look at. So we are supposed to be looking at him through his word and being molded more into Christ's likeness. But if we're constantly filling our minds with the world, and I would even say, like with AI these days, most of what we're consuming is not even real. Like we're like in this alternate universe of, and that's just gonna, with AI pretty soon. My brother Nate was telling me about the dead internet theory and how it's all just bots communicating and no real person is contributing any more content to the internet. It's all fake videos and photos and content. So yeah, we don't want to be molded into that. Like we want to look at Christ and turn into Christ likeness, not into whatever is on the internet. And it happens so subtly. It's just, before we know it, what we're looking at becomes normal and acceptable, and we're just kind of flowing along with the culture in that. So,
Yeah, and I think that, we we're being catechized into a way of looking at the world and about what we should want. Do you know what I mean? Like it's this is sort of like the meta thing that's going on as we consume media. We're being trained in like what should be desirable. Like it happens in like less important things about like our aesthetic, about like, oh, here's how I should decorate my home. You know what I mean? There's trends and things like that. But it happens like at the deeper heart level, our affections are being trained. We're being told what's beautiful, what we should want. And the whole thing is driven by this marketing thing that like there's ads everywhere, and so we're being told what to want there. And this occurred to me. I was reading this morning in Second Peter, and he's talking about in chapter 2 about like the unrighteous that are among the believers that are within their midst, and he has all these bad things to say. But one of the ones that stood out to me in verse 14, he says that they have eyes full of adultery, insatiable for sin. They entice unsteady souls. They have hearts trained in greed. It's like that is such an interesting expression, that last one, hearts trained in greed. And it made me think about how much like it's the water we swim in. Is everything is an ad. And what does that teach me? You need more. You need more. You need this one thing. Everything that is out there is calculated to tell you there's a deficiency in your life and this thing can solve it. And it like remaps the way you look at everything. It's absolutely an assault on our contentment. And it's a lie because you don't need not just that stuff. You don't need anything. You have Christ and you have him who's providing your food and your clothes and taking care of your every need. You have what you need. And the whole giant message of this huge, media machine that we consume through our phones is you do not have enough. We will provide it for you. That's that heart trained in greed. And I think we have to be really careful about that.
yeah. And I've often we've talked a little bit about this on the podcast before, but just how much even technology can be influencing relationships and dating. Singleness is on the rise and marriage is declining. And so, what's contributing to that? I really do think technology and the expectations and what we're looking for is being shaped, and we're not being shaped by God's word and what he's telling us is valuable and what we should be looking for in a spouse. And so, and I think, yeah, it could be just kind of scratching that relational itch for a lot of people. Like you said, it's like giving people a little bit of, you know, relationship with, and they're getting the likes and the affirmation that way, but not through person to person interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. And when everything's like this measurable commodity too, like relationships become quantified by likes and all that stuff. Even like the dating apps is like a logical extension of that attitude of like trying to optimize for the exact right kind of person. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's all part of this philosophy of that is has been shaped by the whoever the technology people are, and it's just very hard. It like I said, it's the water we're swimming in. It's very hard to be aware of it, like unless you start looking for it. It's so normal that when we really step outside of it for a little bit and look at it, we're like, this is insane.
Yeah.
It really is crazy.
Well, and I imagine you would notice that more if you step away from it for a season. If you do, what they call a digital detox, you're separating yourself. I remember years ago, I decided, okay, I'm going to, quit Facebook for a time. I think I deactivated, which actually is, I would recommend that. That helped me because I didn't want to completely delete Facebook. I have a lot of memories on there, especially for me. My dad, who is with the Lord now, he used Facebook a lot. So I have so many of his messages and content from him there. So I'm like, I don't want to get rid of this, but I can deactivate it. I can log in on occasion if I need to reach out to someone. But it was a great kind of loophole in that. But when I think I was like 18. Decided I'm going to step away from Facebook. And then all of a sudden, I was watching all my siblings on the computer constantly and fighting over who got to sit and look at Facebook. We were all sharing one computer back. This is before we had our smartphones. And I was like, all of a sudden, very aware of like, that used to be me.
Yeah.
I used to be fighting over time on the computer to check Facebook. And now I'm watching everyone else do it. And it just seems so crazy. So, yeah, what would you say are boundaries that people can start? Give us some actionable, what are things we can start doing to limit our smartphone usage and just put boundaries around that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be different for everybody. And so if I could maybe offer a framework that might be useful, I'd say, you look at Ephesians and Colossians, we talk about like the put on, put off principle. And I think one of the things where this can come in handy here is understanding that we're not just trying to not do something, like, right? We're not trying to just remove the phone or remove social media or remove time with it. We're trying to remove it because we're trying to replace it with something better. And so I think coming at it with that positive outlook where you first determine what is the thing that you're wanting to do. Maybe it's just one area. There's some area of your life that you're like, I am being negligent or not as faithful as I should be in my devotions or FaceTime with friends or prayer, or I want to be reading more real books. It could be anything. And I think you decide on what is the thing that you want to replace some aspect of your phone usage with first. Then you go to the put off. You say, okay, so I'm going to remove from me during that time. I'm going to make a deliberate plan where I'm going to limit or not use my phone for these things. So, for example, like when I had a phone, I had a rule that I held myself to where I wasn't allowed to use my phone before breakfast. And that was a really helpful. It was just a simple thing, but it had a reason behind it. And the reason was because that's when I wanted to spend time with the Lord. And even after that, I would spend time reading. And so I thought, if I just put my phone in another room and don't use it till after breakfast, that's a rule for me. I'm not allowed to do it. Then I'm able to have space for the thing I want to do. And so I'd say think creatively about that. What exactly you're trying to accomplish? Because just not using your phone it's gonna reveal some things like you were talking about. Like when you step away from a little bit, you're like, whoa, okay. You start to see things more clearly about where there might be problems. But the real objective isn't simply to spend less time on the phone. It's to rectify some of these areas that we might be negligent in.
I like that, thinking about the why behind what we're doing, what we want to put on. And one thing that I've done is I put a note on my phone and I will just take a little bit of time each week to put all the links for all the sermons, podcasts that I want to listen to, articles I want to read. And so when I have some downtime or time to kill, I'll just open up that note and go to those links. And so I have a plan in place of how to use those extra moments.
Yeah, I think that's wise. Like, I think the avoiding the algorithm, like because the algorithmic feed, and especially in social media, but it's in everything now. That's the thing that's calculated to keep you spending as much time on the device as possible. And so I'm not saying that it's the algorithm's bad or doesn't help you discover good things sometimes, but recognizing with precision that that's the thing that's trying to suck me in. what you did, I love that, is you're saying, hey, I've got a list of things. Like if I want to look at some media, I want to read something, I want to watch a video, I've been saving stuff and now I'll do that. And you're approaching it with intentionality rather than the kind of the doom scroll where you just open it up and you open your mouth, and just look at it for however long until, you start to feel miserable. I think that's a really good one, a good tip. Another thing I found really helpful is using some sort of a blocker. So there's all kinds of these, like on iOS, like the iPhone, and Android has a version of it too, where it's called Screen Time on iOS. I can't remember what it's called on Android. Those don't work that well. If you know what I'm talking about, like you can set up rules and say, I'm only allowed to use social media this long because you can ignore it. Like you can just say, yeah, yeah. And so all you're doing is just like you train your muscle memory to like very quickly click ignore, you know? But you can do something short of like getting rid of your phone, of getting an app blocker. Like there's one called Opal that's good. There's another one called Freedom. That's my favorite. Freedom.to is the website. It works on everything. Like it'll work on your phone and your computer and your tablet. It doesn't matter. It's Windows, Android, iOS, Mac, anything. And you only need one subscription. And they often do sales for like a lifetime subscription. So I think I paid 70 or 80 bucks like 5 years ago. And the reason it's so great is it blocks everything. So if you tell it, I want to block Facebook during, so like the main way it's designed, I'm getting into details because I think this will be helpful, but like the main way it's designed is for someone to say, for example, you're a student, you say, I want to study for an hour and not have any, I just want to like not have to exercise my self-control to get off the social media or whatever it is that I use too much of. You press a button for an hour, you can't get on any of those things, even if you try to go through the web browser and on all your devices at the same time. But the way I used it, one of the features of it, and I still use this on my computer, is I set up a schedule. And so the same way I said in the morning, I don't want to be able to use my phone. Now I have the same thing on my computer is because I have my computer in my office where I do my devotions. And so there is the temptation of I'll just go on YouTube or whatever. I can't get on YouTube until after breakfast. I literally can't because it's a schedule and it's just set up to repeat every weekday. And so something like that used strategically can really, really help you bring some, what was it, boundaries to it. But I think that one of the wrong attitudes we can have for it is by, I think I mentioned this earlier, but the thing about like, well, we'll use self-discipline. And we see that it's like it's a personal weakness if I can't resist the urge to do this. But again, the people who've made this software and these devices are way smarter than us, and they've calculated how to keep us. And keep in mind, usually the time when you use your device in ways that you don't want to is when your self control, your energy's at its lowest. You know what I mean? It's like after end of a tired day, you're like, oh, this is a rough day. And then you just scroll for forever. And you're like, why did I do that? I just wasted this whole evening. And so, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with proactively avoiding temptation. Like if Paul tells Timothy to flee it. So, like, why not just not go down that road at all? Like it talks about in Proverbs, just don't find ways to block the road off to yourself, so you just don't have the option.
I always thought, well, this is an opportunity to practice self-control and to exercise that muscle and get strong. But like you said, it's those moments when we're weakest, when we're tired. And so fleeing is the best option and just taking it off of our minds entirely, which I think that probably does when you're using that Freedom app. It's just like you're just taking the option out of there. You're not even having to think about it anymore.
Yeah, it's like saving your willpower or something. That's how I think about it. I'm like, I'm just preserving my willpower. I can use that on something else. And that is what you find is like, it's not about that you're trying to cut this stuff out so that you can do nothing or that you can work more or like, well, why? Because people might hear this and be like, well, I need to rest and relax. I would just suggest that there are many ways to rest and relax that are less harmful to you, that are more beneficial. Again, I grew up reading all the time. And once smartphones got into my pocket, I read far less. Now I find that I don't use a smartphone anymore. I read a lot more. It's much more appealing to me, and it's very restful. But it's also not, I don't walk away from it like I did like when I'd scroll my phone without really any purpose and feel kind of like icky. Like, why did I do all that? You know, I can read good books. I can spend, that's how people used to do entertain themselves. They'd spend time with friends. I'm just trying to say there are degrees to the quality of leisure that we take. And some types of leisure are even more restful and beneficial to us. And so we get into this default way of thinking about like the way that I need to unwind is turning my brain off and flipping on Netflix or turning my brain off and going on Instagram reels. And I would just suggest that once you pull away from those a little bit, you will find much more pleasure in these deeper, richer types of leisure.
Good points. And always talked on this podcast about, what women can be doing to even prepare well for marriage and family. And I know that for moms especially, they can be just really tired and use, apps and social media as a way to just cope and get through the mundane parts of life. So whatever we can be doing now in our singleness to build good habits so that'll set us up well someday for busier seasons when we're going to be way more tired. It's going to be harder to set up these systems later in life. So I'm always thinking ahead of like what's benefiting me now, but also in 5 to 10 years from now, what am I going to be thankful for that I've set up? What habits? Because life is all about habits we're building, and sometimes we're not even aware that we've built them. They've just kind of come into our lives, and so we got to be proactive in that. But speaking of social media, what encouragement if someone just recognizing that that is a particular area of struggle in their life, maybe it's feeding into their discontentment, comparison, all of these bad fruits. What what encouragement would you give someone who is considering limiting or deleting their social media?
Yeah, one of the first things I would say is that you are allowed to delete it and you're allowed to limit it. It sounds funny. I don't think this is as common anymore, but in like the 2010s, mid 2010s, there was very much a within the evangelical world. You'd read blog articles or hear pastors or Christians talk a lot about like, well, we need to be on the social platforms because it's part of our witness and our outreach to the world. And I think there's valid points to that, but I feel like the more I've reflected on it, because I've been off social media for over 2 years now, and it took that was one of the things that kept like it was in the back of my head. I'm like, well, like I'm just taking my voice out of the public square, like you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of like guilt around that. Like, shouldn't I be in the world but not of it? Like I don't have a responsibility to my neighbor. And the more and more it occurred to me that we kind of had a little bait and switch happen with social media. If you've been around since the beginning of Facebook, for example, it's not, none of the platforms are social media anymore. They've all turned into entertainment platforms. You don't see, for the most part, stuff from your friends. You see an algorithmically curated feed of things designed to hold your attention as long as possible. And you combine that with most of us don't post. Like it's like less than 1% of social media users post, even once a month. It's not really social. Like like we're kind of comparing apples and oranges. It, for most of us, it's a question of hey, I am consuming. I'm just a consumer of this. And so I say all that to say like not that I'm anybody, but you do have permission to leave. Like you don't have to be there because they're in everything, all of our attention, our time, we're always making trade-offs. And the time you're spending on social media, you could be investing in richer relationships if your concern is, well, I don't want to not be, connected with people. So that's one thing. I just wanted to say that on the forefront. But I found, and this is just my experience, that leaving it was much scarier, like in prospect than it was in retrospect. Like I thought through every like I could show you on my computer pages and pages of me just like reasoning out. Well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Like if I completely quit, what would, and when I finally pulled the plug, it was like nothing happened. And it was really funny because like I did all this stuff. Like you can download backups of your Facebook history and all that stuff because I've been on there forever. Same as you, like I have all these memories and stuff. And like if I need those pictures or like I can go find them somewhere. But it was not that big of a deal. And it was basically all upside immediately. And 2 years looking back on it, like the only thing I regret is that I didn't do it sooner, like get completely off. And again, I'm not saying everyone needs to do this, but I'm speaking to the person who's like, I want to step away. Now, in terms of like practically, whether you just want to limit it or cut it out entirely, I would say you suggested this earlier, but I'm right there with you. I would do a trial run. You can call it a digital detox or whatever, but just say, all right, I'm going to go a week, or ideally, I'm going to go 30 days. I'm not going to log in. I'm going to take all the apps off my phone. You can temporarily suspend your accounts on most of the platforms, and just commit to, I'm going to go 30 days, no social media. And it'll probably do three things for you. One, it will show you how addicted you are. This was the most surprising thing to me when in 2021 I got a dumb phone, the Light Phone 2. And I thought this is going to be great. And I felt like I was a drug addict the first week. Like I kept reaching into my pocket and I'd pull out this phone that has no apps on it, it had a calculator app, and I would like do calculation, like what's 7 times 7, And I was like, wow, like it wasn't until I took it away that I realized I constantly was thinking about my phone and how often the slightest just whiff of boredom on the breeze would cause me to look at my phone. Anything, any excuse, anytime there was a lull in conversation, my temptation, even if I didn't always seize upon it, was I should see if there's something on my phone to entertain me. So that's one of the benefits. I think if you take a little break, you'll be like, whoa, you'll be able to gauge a little bit with some more objectivity how big of or small of a problem it is for you. The other thing it'll do is it will show you, I think, how much it doesn't really matter. Like you'll have the withdrawal thing. You're like, oh, I wonder what about so and so. I wonder about this. But you, especially if you do a longer break, like a month, you're going to quickly realize this is actually not that big of a deal. Like I don't really miss it. And then the third thing I would just mention, this is from my experience, is it it showed me at least, and I think it'd be the same for others, just how free you feel without it. After you get through that initial week of just being like, this is so unusual, like for me, my mind started to clear in a very surprising way because I felt like I actually have time to process stuff. I have time to think through things. I have time, like we talked about, to pray, to meditate. My attention is more sustained. Like I'm able to read more pages in the book before I feel like I have to go check my email or something because it's just harder to do. So I think that those are three things that if you just take a small break, it'll give you some insight. And then you can use that insight to say, okay, what measures can I take to make this more permanent? Am I going to use an app blocker? Am I have rules simply that I hold myself to? I'm not going to have apps on there. I'm not going to have games or something like that. Or am I going to pursue, is it enough of an issue that I'm like, I'm going to try to find a way to not use this at all? So I think that's a good, safe way. You're not burning any bridges or anything, but you're letting yourself actually see from outside, from a semi-objective point of view, what your relationship with your phone has actually turned into, because it's hard to see from within.
It's so true. And I've experienced some of those same things where, I've deleted Instagram. I didn't have a way to log into Facebook. I deleted the YouTube app. That was helpful for me too, because now anytime I want to watch YouTube, I don't have the app set up. So I have to go through a browser and then I have the ads and it's just all this extra friction.
That little bit of friction. Yeah, it does help, doesn't it?
It really does. But I was just pulling out my phone and looking at it and being like, there's nothing for me here. You're just constantly like looking for something from it and realizing, okay, it's not there anymore. But it's encouraging to hear that you can get your attention back and that you can actually increase your attention again and focus. And I've again experienced some of those same things where when I've taken breaks, I've had the mental clarity coming back. You do feel way less stressed. You talked about that cognitive debt. And then I had more time to be creative too and to do other things. I was cooking more, I was doing more music, I was writing more. I just saw that increase in my life. And I was also texting and calling friends more. I'm not a great texter. And so if I don't have a lot of mental space for it, it'll take me a while to get back to people. But I found like when I wasn't on social media, I was more invested in my friends and responding to their text messages. I just had more capacity to do that. But yeah, it's your points to how it's those entertainment or social media platforms have become entertainment platforms. It's so true. And I was realizing like most of the time I'm scrolling, I'm consuming content from people I don't even know. Like I'm watching all these videos on Instagram of like, I don't even know who this person is. And I'm watching their video. And then on Facebook, it's like all AI generated. It's just like ridiculous videos of ambulance driving down the freeway and a stretcher falling out the back. And you're just like, what am I watching? This is
Isn't it
ridiculous.
crazy now that we can't like tell? Like it
I,
blows my mind the how
yeah.
good the AI videos have gotten.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, if I could, sorry to jump in there, if I could make a prediction, I think that people who begin to limit their phone use and their social media use, it will become like the cigarette analogy. It will become much more normal in very short order. I think people are getting very sick of it, and I think it would be cool if believers were sort of leading the charge on that and saying, "Hey, yeah, like this, we see what's coming and we see that this is a problem." And I mean, the total breakdown in truth and your ability to know what's real is terrifying.
Yeah. And I just feel so bad for the elderly people that are on these platforms. Then their discernment is not as good at that age. And they are just being led astray by everything they're watching. And I was starting to see this just by all the content, the fake content coming out, even with John MacArthur, all the videos and the AI. We were getting so many calls at Grace to You from people that were so confused because they were watching or hearing sermons that were not John MacArthur. And I mean, I would say a good portion of the calls we were getting recently were having to clarify and tell people don't use YouTube anymore to consume John MacArthur's content. Go to the Grace to You page, or we just had to constantly be redirecting people. So yeah, it's hard how it's creating such confusion. We have to be so discerning right now and just being very careful with where we're getting our content and making sure it's accurate. And I think that's, just going to be increasing. Reagan is so helpful. I hope after some of this, people will put in a little more effort. I mean, it takes effort to change habits and to be convicted to do that. So I hope that people will feel some of that and put some action behind what they know they should be doing. But we know we have God's help in that. God desires us to grow and to be fruitful and to not be distracted and apathetic or numb to these things. But we want to use his power so we can pray through this process and read his word and just inform our convictions and our habits. And I think that this discussion will help the listeners to do that. Now, if they want to read more about what you're doing with redeeming productivity, do you have any direction for them on that?
Yeah, you can find everything at redeemingproductivity.com. We've got newsletter. I'm on YouTube, a podcast as well, and there's lots of resources on the website for planning your devotions, morning routines, goal setting habits, all that kind of stuff. And there's lots of stuff on smartphone usage that get into the nitty gritty if you're interested in more on this topic.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll link all of that for the listeners. And yeah, excited to see how God uses this. And I'm just inspired and spurred on to keep striving forward in this fight against being controlled by my smartphone, but finding ways to control it and use it as a good tool, but not let it master me. So thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate it.